I always thought chaos had a smell, sterile alcohol, blood-soaked gauze, maybe a hint of burnt toast from the break room microwave. And if you spend enough time working trauma in an ER, you start to believe you can predict the shape of disaster just by the scent. That's how I explained the moment I knew Shayna was cheating. Not from a text. Not from some dramatic confrontation. Just this shift in the air. The kind that hits you between triage and the third flatline of the night. She left for a travel contract in Phoenix, kissed me goodbye in the car like she always did, eyes too wide, promises too easy, and I went back upstairs thinking I'd finally caught a good one. A nurse, like me, understood the grind, the overtime, the wreckage we come home carrying in our bones. But a week later, I come home early from a shift, back-to-back codes, soaked in someone else's blood and half a panic attack from a 12-year-old who died mid-transfer, and there's a stranger in my house. Not a person, no. Worse. It was an email notification from Airbnb thanking me for my listing. Turns out Shayna hadn't just left for Phoenix. She'd turned our place into a temporary rental. Pictures of my living room, my books, my grandfather's military flag folded in the corner, all uploaded online for $109 a night and described as cozy, charming, full of character. And there it was, the first real breath of chaos. I didn't even flip out at first. Just stood there, imagining what kind of stranger had slept in my bed, touched my shower curtain, maybe stolen one of my meds from the locked cabinet she somehow forgot to relock. I checked the trash. New toothbrush. New sheets. Not the ones I used. I laughed, actually laughed, because it felt like the only sane thing to do. The joke wrote itself. My girlfriend is renting out my life by the night. Cute. But the comedy peeled back fast when I called her. Straight to voicemail. Hours later, she texts, "Sorry. Wi-Fi is spotty. Everything okay?" "Yeah. Sure. Everything's fine. I'm just living in a low-budget reality show I never agreed to be on." I didn't confront her. Not then. That's not how I work. I started documenting, screenshotting, learning, quietly, methodically, like I was prepping for surgery. Because that's what you do when you're bleeding and nobody sees it. You compress, you stay conscious, and you plan your next move. Then came the gala. I wasn't invited. Shayna said it was just a professional mixer, very boring, nothing I'd want to fly out for. But the hospital gossip circuit is small, and when a traveling nurse ends up in a photo tagged with some neurosurgeon named Dario who is definitely not her brother despite what she claimed, yeah, that's another shift in the air. The photo didn't hurt. Not at first. What hurt was the caption, "Power couple of the night." And there she was, wearing the necklace I gave her after her first code blue save. Standing with him like the world made perfect sense. Like none of this, us, had ever been real. I remember sitting in my car outside the ER parking garage, hands shaking on the steering wheel, realizing I didn't even know who the hell I'd been living with. And still, I didn't say a word. Not to her. Not to anyone. Just let her keep spinning her web, smiling in photos, calling me baby in texts while she booked another listing for our place without even telling me. But then I started getting mail, bank statements, credit card bills I never opened because I thought they were junk. And that's when I found out she'd opened 2 cards under my name. Maxed them. One of them paid for that work trip to Mexico. Another covered a week at a spa in Sedona. She'd used my credit to fund her double life and had the audacity to keep asking me to Venmo her just a little for groceries when she was back in town. That's the moment something shifted inside me. Not anger. Something colder. More precise. Like the calm before a massive clot dislodges. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to throw things or post screenshots online or call her names. No. I was going to do this my way. I was going to make her believe everything was still fine. Let her feel comfortable. Let her keep weaving her lies, while I built a case tight enough to suffocate her career. Because in nursing, fraud isn't just a mistake. It's a weapon you use on patients. And if you can't be trusted with a man's name, you sure as hell can't be trusted with his 4-line. Funny how they never see it coming when you smile and say, "Have a safe trip." We met the way all disaster stories pretend to be love stories at first. Between caffeine and chaos, elbow deep in a code blue at County General, both of us soaked in sweat and adrenaline and something that felt like connection. Shayna had this way of locking eyes mid-panic, like she could freeze time just enough to let you breathe. I was new to that hospital, still shaking off the ghosts of my deployment years, and she was the first person who didn't flinch when I talked too little or stared too long. Said I was calm under pressure, which, looking back, was just her polite way of saying I didn't emote unless the walls were on fire. We started getting lunch on the third-floor patio, shared protein bars, made jokes about nurses dating nurses being bad math. But we fell into it anyway. Fast, easy, natural. Moved in after 6 months like it was just the next shift on the schedule. She loved little routines, morning playlists, mismatched coffee mugs, saying hi roomie every time she walked in even though we were way past roommates. And I let it happen. Let her decorate the place with throw pillows and fake succulents and those passive-aggressive wall signs that say things like live, laugh, love in cursive. She brought color into a place that had only ever known beige and shadow. So yeah, it felt good. Stable. Even domestic, which I hadn't thought I was built for. She worked travel assignments but always came back. Said I was home base. And I believed that. Believed her. Even when the story started getting blurrier, like the time she extended a contract last minute and missed our anniversary, said her flight was delayed but never showed me a boarding pass. Or when she told me her phone died and that's why she hadn't texted for 2 days while hiking with girlfriends. It's easy to ignore cracks when you're tired. When your shifts are 12 hours and death is part of the job. You don't come home looking to investigate. You come home hoping the world just stays quiet for a few hours. I told myself she deserved trust. That being paranoid would make me the villain. I even covered for her once when her license renewal email showed up in my inbox by accident and I saw she'd changed her listed address twice. She had some excuse about keeping things separate for tax reasons. I nodded, told her I got it. And maybe that's where I messed up, not because I didn't trust her, but because I wanted to. Because someone finally made the house feel warm and not like a bunker. We had our rituals, late-night sushi, Grey's Anatomy marathons with commentary, the occasional camping trip where she always insisted on bringing a flask of emergency bourbon. She laughed like she didn't owe the world anything, and I think I admired that until I realized she just never felt responsible for anyone's wreckage, not even her own. Looking back, the red flags were fluorescent. Her phone never left her hand but always flipped face down. She avoided video calls unless she controlled the lighting and background. She never saved contacts by name, just emojis. But I chalked it up to quirks. Everyone has them. I had mine. Like checking locks twice. Like watching people's hands more than their eyes. But there was one night, just one, that still burns. We were on the couch, and I fell asleep on her lap. Half asleep, I felt her take my hand and whisper, "You trust too easy. You know that?" I laughed, didn't open my eyes, said, "Not really." And she kissed my forehead like it was a joke. Like it was nothing. But now it feels like prophecy. I didn't know, then, that love could be used as a staging area. That someone could live inside your peace, learn your patterns, and still be building an exit route with someone else's hands. When she left for that last assignment, I carried her bags down, kissed her twice, and told her to text when she landed. She said, "You're the best thing that's ever happened to me," and I said it back. Just like that. No hesitation. No clue that she was already dismantling the life we'd built in slow motion. Ripping my name off accounts, erasing our shared playlists, rerouting her mail. But I felt it. Not consciously. More like the way you notice it's too quiet before a monitor flatlines. Something was off. I just couldn't prove it. Not yet. So I went to work. Ate dinner alone. Texted her photos of the cat curled up in the laundry basket. She sent heart emojis. Said she missed me. And I believed her. Or maybe I believed in who she used to be. But either way, the storm had already started. I just hadn't heard the thunder yet. It was a Thursday, always a Thursday for some reason, the slow descent days, and I was in the break room microwaving black coffee because I'd skipped sleep again, running on adrenaline and processed bitterness, when Jenna from radiology came in. Grinning like she was holding a secret she couldn't wait to spill. "Didn't know Shayna was back in town," she said, casual, like mentioning the weather. I blinked. "She's not. She's still in Phoenix." Jenna cocked her head, confused. "Weird. I could have sworn I saw her last night downtown, Bar Clementine. She was with some guy in a blazer, tall, looked like a pharma bro. She was all over him." My spine went cold in increments. I forced a laugh I didn't feel and said, "No, must have been someone else." Jenna shrugged, unfazed, and left, and I stood there staring at the coffee as it spun in slow, hypnotic circles behind the greasy plastic window, thinking about how many versions of her could exist without my permission. I didn't text Shayna right away. I told myself it was nothing. But later that night, I checked the apartment remotely. I'd installed a smart lock months ago, part paranoia, part habit, and she'd used the code. At 12:43 a.m., while I was on shift, Shayna had been in our place. I stared at the log, heart crawling up my throat, and tried to rationalize. Maybe she came back early. Maybe she didn't want to wake me up. But she hadn't said a word. No text. No call. No missed you. Just slipped in and out like a thief with keys. I called her. Straight to voicemail. Again. Texted. Everything okay? No reply until the next morning. Sorry, clinic ran late. I'm exhausted. Love you. I stared at those 3 words, love you, and felt something under my ribs snap sideways. Love wasn't supposed to come with timestamps and lies. I didn't respond. Not right away. Instead, I drove home between shifts, stomach knotted, and walked through the apartment like I was examining a crime scene. Everything looked normal. Neatly made bed, laundry basket half full, her stupid coffee pods stacked alphabetically like always. But something was off. Too clean. Too curated. A layer of artificial calm, like a motel room, staged to feel like home. I opened drawers. Looked at the closet. Half her clothes were gone. The red heels she always wore when she wanted attention, gone. Makeup bag, gone. The emergency bourbon flask? Still there. Always the decoy. Always something to distract. I sat down on the edge of the bed and stared at the nightstand, at the stupid framed photo of us from last summer. Her in sunglasses, me half smiling. Both of us looking like we belonged in someone else's memory. That's when I noticed the scent. Not hers. Not mine. Cologne. Sharp, citrusy, something expensive. And not something I've ever worn. I lifted the pillow. Nothing. But it was there. In the sheets. In the air. A ghost that didn't belong. I stood up, walked into the bathroom, and checked the mirror for answers like it was a confession booth. Same face. Same tired eyes. But now there was doubt curling behind them. Smoke rising before the fire. I didn't sleep that night. Just lay in bed listening to silence that felt louder than any argument. I didn't confront her. Not then. But I started tracing the cracks. Replaying conversations. Her jokes that felt hollow. The way she'd stopped saying goodnight if I didn't text first. The way she started saying, "You're so good to me," instead of, "I love you." I called her again the next day, and this time she picked up. Her voice was bright. Too bright. Like she was performing. "Hey babe. Sorry I've been so MIA. Crazy schedule. How's work?" I listened carefully. No background noise. No traffic. Just a kind of padded silence, like she was inside but pretending to be out. I asked her how Phoenix was. She said hot. Long hours. I asked how her team was. She paused. Said, "Oh, typical chaos." But her pause was half a second too long. That was the moment. The seam. The instant I knew something was wrong, and it wasn't just stress or distance or overthinking. It was betrayal blooming behind her voice like mold under drywall. I didn't push. Just said I missed her. She said it back. And then I hung up and stared at my reflection again, realizing I didn't know who the hell I was talking to. That woman in Phoenix wasn't Shayna anymore. Or maybe she never was. Maybe I'd just built someone around the pieces she let me see. Either way, the illusion was cracking, and once you see the fracture line, there's no pretending the glass is whole. I stopped sleeping after that call, couldn't shut off the noise in my head, couldn't stand the silence in the apartment. So I turned my exhaustion into a weapon, carved my focus down to the bone, and started paying attention like I was prepping for a trauma recess with no attending in sight. The first step wasn't rage, it was documentation. I pulled our shared bank records, not the day-to-day checking account, but the things we'd set up when we moved in. Backup credit cards, joint utility apps, her contributions. She said she was auto-paying. But the payments were stopped. My name was still listed as the primary. And then I found it. 3 months back, a hotel charge in Denver on a night. She claimed she was stuck in Flagstaff due to airport delays. I checked her calendar. She'd even put it in, flight rescheduled. Back tomorrow. But the charge said Crescent Hotel, 10:52 p.m. And here's the detail that stuck like glass. She ordered room service. Steak. Red wine. 2 meals. I copied the invoice. Labeled it. Moved on. I didn't want to follow her physically. Too obvious. Too messy. But I remembered she once synced her travel calendar to our shared iCloud for convenience. Forgot to unsync when she went independent. It was still linked. I checked it daily. Quiet. Unassuming. Then boom, appointment in Boulder, client lunch, logged for Friday. I swapped my shift. Took personal time. Drove out early, parked 2 blocks from the bistro. Didn't even know what I was expecting. Maybe some work friend, Maybe some innocent brunch that would make me feel like a paranoid fool. But when I saw her step out of that black Audi in a dress I'd never seen, laughing with some square-jawed man in a charcoal suit, I felt my stomach drop like I'd been gut-punched through Kevlar. She didn't see me. I stayed seated on a bench, angled just right, watching as they kissed, not on the cheek, not quick, but slow, possessive, like something that had history and permission. He touched her lower back like he owned the space, and she let him. I took a photo. Not for blackmail, not for rage. Just so I'd never forget the moment fiction broke into fact. I left before they ordered, drove to the old part of town, and sat in my car for an hour, heartbeat steady, thoughts cold. I realized then I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to cry or scream or ask her why, because I already knew the why didn't matter. What mattered was understanding the architecture of the lie. I started mapping it out. Every name she'd dropped in passing, every travel assignment I'd never seen documentation for, every time she'd asked for help moving money or forwarding mail. I made lists, tags, dates. It stopped being about heartbreak and started becoming a case file. I remembered one of her nurse friends, Keely, used to talk about Shayna's side hustle consulting. I texted Keely, casual, said I was helping Shayna with her resume. Hey, do you remember the name of that startup she was working with last year? Keely replied in under a minute. Oh yeah, Dermavex. Or maybe it was Pharmacore by the end. They merged, I think. Pharmacore. The guy at the bistro. Pharmabro. I searched the company, pulled board photos. There he was. Dario Lane, VP of Product Development. And married. I cross-referenced his socials. No recent posts with a spouse, but a clear pattern of discreet trips that lined up disturbingly well with Shayna's contracts. I kept digging. Found a public database of nursing licenses. Pulled hers. Active, yes, but listed under 2 addresses. Ours, and one I didn't recognize in Aurora. Another search. Rented condo under a different name, but the emergency contact listed was me. Still me. Even as she built this shadow life, she left traces of me in the foundation. I started to feel like a ghost haunting someone else's deception. I wasn't just the fool. I was the fallback plan. And that's when something new clicked into place. Not pain, not rage, but a kind of focus I hadn't felt since Afghanistan. Back then, you didn't charge the problem. You flanked it. You observed, logged, waited for the right opening. That's what I was doing now. Building my case. Quietly. Completely. I copied emails, noted overlaps, printed receipts, tracked travel logs, even ordered a background report on Dario, just to be thorough. I wasn't going to go scorched earth. I was going to make it surgical. Precise. Let her feel untouched until the floor dropped out from under her. Because trust isn't something you rebuild after this. It's something you raise to the foundation and salt the ground. And I was done waiting for the storm to pass. I was becoming the thunder. It was the folder that did it. Not dramatic, not planted, just a folder misnamed on a shared desktop we'd long since forgotten about. Something left open by accident when she borrowed my laptop to send a PDF before heading to her overnight shift. I was home early the next morning, back aching, brain shot, just trying to check email when the screen jolted awake to a half-open Finder window titled Invoices Final Drafts. Innocent enough. But the preview pane showed a document labeled Pharmacore Retreat Q4. Expenses S.Roy.XLSX. S. Roy. Her maiden name, which she only used on paperwork that didn't involve me. I clicked, pulse steady. The spreadsheet opened with the casual brutality of truth. Expense line items. Luxury hotel in Sedona. First-class airfare, spa treatments. Catering notes for VIP dinner. 2 guests confirmed. The second tab hit harder. Reimbursement emails sent to Dario Lane's corporate address, with thank you notes signed by her. No clinic codes. No patient logs. Just dinners, massages, private outings, and line items like wellness weekend planning, couples activities preview. Couple. No plausible deniability left. No shadow of a maybe. This wasn't infidelity by omission. It was a parallel reality, meticulously planned, funded, hidden behind a veil of white lies and affectionate text messages about how exhausted she was from back-to-back double shifts. The weight of it didn't crash over me like a wave. It lowered slowly, like an iron curtain sliding into place. Cold. Final. I closed the laptop. Sat back. Stared at the framed print on the wall, a cheap Etsy watercolor she picked, that said start each day with intention. I smiled then, not because it was funny, because there was nothing left to do but smile. She came home 2 hours later, smelling like lavender soap and hand sanitizer, dropped her keys in the bowl by the door like nothing in the world had shifted. I watched her from the kitchen, sipping burned coffee, as she peeled off her jacket and kissed me on the cheek. "Rough night," she muttered, stretching. "Some psych guy threw a chair." I nodded, said nothing, just watched her move around the space like it still belonged to both of us. She didn't notice the silence, not really. She'd grown used to my quiet, used to mistaking restraint for passivity. That's the thing about being the calm one. They never realize when you've already made the decision. We sat on the couch. She flipped through a streaming menu. I stared at her hands. Not shaking, not anxious, perfectly at ease. And something about that, the ease, the confidence, made me realize how long she'd been practicing this. How much of her life had been rehearsal for the next man, the next lie, the next clean getaway. I thought about the time we argued over a $60 phone charger. She cried, said I made her feel controlled. Meanwhile, she'd been siphoning off hundreds under corporate aliases and using my name for stability in case her affair blew up. I knew it all now: names, dates, addresses, purchase history, the Shell LLC she filed in Colorado to receive payments discreetly. I even had the EIN number. My silence wasn't brooding. It was loading. I told her I was going to bed early. She didn't question it. Just blew me a kiss, told me she loved me, said she'd come join me soon. I laid there, staring at the ceiling fan rotate like a slow metronome of my own restraint, and thought about how betrayal doesn't feel like fire, it feels like vacuum. Airless, quiet, efficient. And I thought about how every step I'd taken since that first gut check in the break room had been leading here, not to confrontation, but to confirmation. I had all the proof. Not just of the cheating, of the fraud, the identity use, the falsified documents. I could ruin her with a few forwarded emails, get her license reviewed, trigger a cascading series of HR audits that would follow her to any facility she ever worked in again. But that wasn't tonight. Tonight wasn't about revenge. Tonight was about knowing. About looking across the room at someone who thought they still had you in the palm of their hand and realizing they were already standing on a trapdoor. And they didn't even know it. Not yet. But they would. Soon. She must have felt it, that subtle shift in pressure, the way still water starts to ripple before a storm, because the next morning, she changed. Not much. Just enough to notice. Extra sweetness in her voice, eggs and coffee waiting when I woke up, her in that worn college hoodie she only wore when she wanted to look harmless. "Made your favorite," she said, like we hadn't been walking separate emotional hallways for weeks. I nodded, played my part, chewed slowly while she floated around the kitchen humming a song she used to hate. Then she sat across from me, hands folded, that concerned tilt to her head she used when she wanted to seem vulnerable. "You've been distant," she said, soft. "Is everything okay?" I looked up, locked eyes, and let a half-second of silence stretch just long enough for her to blink. "Just tired," I said. Let her win that round. Let her think the illusion still held. But that was the crack. The first one. She smiled too quickly, like a poker player bluffing with a weak hand. That night she tried again. This time with touch. Curled into me on the couch, breath warm on my neck, hand sliding under my shirt like muscle memory. I didn't flinch. Didn't lean in. Just let her touch me like I was a mannequin she hadn't finished dressing. "I miss you," she whispered, voice breaking just enough to register on the emotional seismograph. I nodded. "Yeah." She pulled back then, just a little, looking for the man she used to manipulate, the man who would have asked what was wrong or stroked her hair or said something forgiving. But he wasn't there. Not anymore. That scared her. I saw it. A flicker behind the lashes. So she shifted tactics, classic pivot. "Are you mad at me? Did I do something?" Voice thin now, playing victim like a rehearsed monologue. "Because if I did, I swear to God, Marcus, just tell me and we'll fix it. Please." I met her gaze and tilted my head slightly. "Nothing to fix," I said, tone even, sterile. And that's when the smile cracked. Just a micro tremor, the muscles of her mouth twitching before she caught it. "You've just been off," she said, trying again. "It's like you're here, but not really. I don't know what to do when you get like this." A tear welled in her right eye. Always the right one first. I used to think that meant it was real. Now I knew better. She moved closer again, lips brushing my jaw. "Can we start over?" she whispered. "Go away for a weekend? Just you and me." I almost laughed. Almost. But I nodded instead. "Maybe." That single word gave her oxygen. She exhaled like a drowning woman breaking surface. But I watched her closely, saw her mentally recalibrating, shifting gears. Seduction again, more physical now, hands tracing familiar paths, mouth urgent, desperate to remind my body of what my brain now rejected. I let her try. Let her believe she still held sway. Her breathing grew faster, but mine stayed flat, detached. I wasn't there for her warmth. I was cataloging behavior, filing away tells, watching the predator realize the prey had flipped the script. And somewhere in her rhythm, I felt the hesitation, the pause, the quiet fear creeping into her fingertips. Because she could feel it too, that I was gone, and she was kissing a man who no longer lived in the house she betrayed. Afterward, she curled against me like nothing had changed, like her lies weren't piled under the mattress we lay on. "I love you," she said, too quickly, like a reflex. I didn't answer, just pulled the blanket higher and stared at the ceiling, listening to her breath even out as she drifted off, thinking she'd reset the game. But she hadn't won. She hadn't even seen the board. And while she slept, tangled in her own fantasy of reconciliation, I lay awake next to her, planning the final moves with the precision of a surgeon and the silence of a man who no longer owed her anything. I didn't want to ruin her. That would have implied anger, and I wasn't angry, not anymore. I was methodical. I wanted something cleaner than rage, something that didn't scream betrayal but whispered consequence. And so I planned it the way I used to prep med kits for the field, quietly, thoroughly, no wasted motion. The first phase was data. I had everything: emails, screenshots, statements, the forged signature on a shared lease extension she backdated using my name. I built a timeline that laid out the fraud like a patient's deterioration chart. First lie, first misuse of identity, first unexplained charge, first visit to that condo in Aurora registered to a shell name I traced back to her consulting firm. I wasn't planning a courtroom ambush. No lawyers, no scandals. That wasn't my war. My war was institutional. I started with the licensing board. Quiet inquiry, anonymous at first, about a nurse operating under conflicting residential and legal documentation. Attached a few flagged billing irregularities, claims filed for patient time in 2 states on the same day, using her NPI number. It wouldn't trigger immediate fallout, but it would open a review. Reviews in healthcare don't just go away. They stick. And they bleed. Next was the HR angle. She'd taken a recent contract at a regional hospital, short-term, high pay, the kind that doesn't vet too hard if your references check out. I called the anonymous tip line. Said there were concerns about unreported business ties with pharmaceutical reps, particularly one Dario Lane. Said I had documentation suggesting she was in a non-disclosed personal relationship with a supplier representative while overseeing post-op med trials. That's a compliance nightmare. Not criminal, not on paper, but enough to start an ethics audit. I even gave them the name of the hotel where one of those expenses overlapped with her supposed night shift. Let them chase the timeline. They would. They always do. And I didn't stop there. I contacted a mid-tier publication that did exposés on healthcare fraud. Nothing flashy, just local grit. Sent a packet. No names. Just patterns, screenshots, receipts. Enough to catch attention. Enough to seed doubt. All with a tone of concern. I just don't want patients hurt by someone cutting corners. Let the fire start without my match in sight. But the real move, the one that would leave a scar, was financial. Not stealing. Just subtraction. Shayna had opened a small credit card using my information and authorization when we moved in. Said she needed it for household emergencies. I'd ignored it, stupidly, until I found out she'd used it to book flights and spa days with Dario. So I froze the account. Sent a fraud report. When they asked for documents, I sent notarized statements and ID. Clean. Precise. The account would be suspended. The card revoked. Her credit score would dip. Nothing catastrophic. Just enough to make every apartment lease, every financing app, every background check stall for a while. Consequences in slow motion. Death by paperwork. And I knew she'd feel it. Because she wasn't reckless. She was strategic. Her whole game was about creating the illusion of responsibility. What I was doing wasn't sabotage. It was exposure. I didn't fabricate a single thing. I just turned on the lights. And when you shine the right kind of light on a carefully curated lie, it doesn't explode. It evaporates. I left no digital trace linking the moves to me. Proxy emails. VPN. Physical drop for the document packet. I used her own sloppiness, the way she reused passwords, the way she trusted autofill to access what I needed without crossing the line into hacking. I didn't need to. She'd given me the keys years ago, assuming I'd never use them. That was her mistake. Thinking I was safe. Thinking I was slow. Thinking I'd absorb betrayal like gauze in a wound. But I wasn't gauze. I was scalpel. And now, with every form submitted, every alert triggered, every quiet storm set in motion, I began to feel the cold satisfaction of a man not avenging heartbreak, but executing justice in the language she understood best: systems, silence, and consequences that would outlast the apology she never planned to make. It started with the license board inquiry, just a small envelope at first, white, harmless, stamped with official insignia that probably made her stomach drop before she even tore it open. She didn't say anything that day, but I watched her closely as she paced the kitchen, phone gripped tight, face flickering between confusion and masked panic, like someone realizing the GPS had rerouted them into a dead-end alley. The next crack came a few mornings later when she got an email alert, laptop open, face Slack, then abruptly stood and shut it without finishing her coffee. Weird spam, she mumbled, but her hands were trembling. I already knew what it was. Her contract hospital had flagged her employment record for review. Not a firing, not yet. Just a hold on her hours, pending internal clarification. I watched her take a sudden mental health day, claiming burnout, while I sipped tea and pretended not to notice her scrolling through old HR emails looking for a contact to plead with. That night she cried in the shower. I didn't ask why. She didn't volunteer. Let her assume it was still her secret. The next morning, a call from a blocked number sent her straight to voicemail, then 5 minutes of frantic tapping, probably deleting things, probably damage control. But you can't mop up a flood with a dish towel. Not when the compliance officer had already been CC'd. By the weekend, she was unraveling visibly, cursing over her phone, snapping at me for putting the wrong glass in the dishwasher. "Everything's going wrong this week," she muttered. "It's like the universe is punishing me for something." I almost choked on my laugh. She checked her credit report next, sat frozen in front of her laptop, lips parted, color draining from her face as the denial email for her car refinance came in. "What the hell?" she whispered. I saw her dig up the old credit card folder, the one she forgot I'd ever seen. She was doing math now, trying to calculate which mistake set the bomb off, which lie came back first. She didn't even know it was all of them. I left that night for a shift I never had and drove a quiet loop around the block just to watch her silhouette through the blinds, pacing like a marionette in a too-small stage play. Sunday morning brought the third strike, a formal notice from her temp agency freezing all current contracts due to pending verifications tied to licensure conflicts and ethics concerns. She looked like a corpse in the chair when I walked in, head down, hands limp, phone buzzing unanswered. "Bad news?" I asked. She didn't even lie. Just shook her head and whispered, "I think someone's trying to destroy me." I nodded, poured my coffee, and sat across from her like I was hearing a friend talk about a distant storm. "Weird," I said. "Who'd do something like that?" She didn't answer. Couldn't. Because she was smart, and somewhere inside her unraveling mind, she had to be piecing it together. Not the how, not yet, but the who. The man across from her, calm and kind, who hadn't raised his voice once. The man who made no accusations, demanded no confessions. The man who simply watched, step by step, as the world she'd built on lies folded in on itself like a collapsing lung. And I knew we weren't done yet. Not by a long shot. It was quiet when I finally spoke, not a storm, not an explosion, just a surgical slice of silence broken by my voice, low and unshaken, the way a man speaks when he's past rage and swimming in something colder. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, clutching her phone like it might still save her, mascara smudged from the night before, wearing that tattered hoodie again like nostalgia could buy her mercy. I stood in the doorway and said her name once, flat, no tenderness, and when she looked up, eyes hollow and rimmed in panic, I began. "You lied with precision," I said, walking slowly, carefully, like approaching a sleeping dog that might still bite. "Not just about who you were with, or where. You built another life with my name under it. My address, my credit, my silence." She opened her mouth, but I held up a hand. Not fast, just enough to remind her she didn't get to speak yet. "You didn't just betray me, Shayna. You used me like scaffolding. Built a second self out of my stability. Cashed in on the version of you I believed in while selling off pieces of the one who touched me at night. That wasn't a mistake. That was a system. I was in front of her now, close enough to see the flicker of tears she was trying to swallow, the twitch of her jaw. You know what's funny? I said, leaning just slightly forward. You could have left. At any point. Packed up, told the truth, walked away with your pride intact. But you didn't. You stayed because I was your alibi. I was the boyfriend back home who made you look grounded. Human. You used my loyalty like a disguise. She shook her head, eyes wet now, but I wasn't done. Do you think I didn't see the timeline? The receipts? Dario's name on every other transaction? The email to him where you called me your emotional fallback, like I was a spare tire you kept in the trunk in case your real ride blew out. Her mouth dropped open. That one landed. I let it sit. Yeah, I read it. Every word. Watched how you played me like a role. The way you kissed me and still smelled like hotel soap. You were careful. I'll give you that. But not careful enough. She stood, now panicked, voice trembling. Marcus. No. I said, sharp now, steel in my voice. You don't get to soften this. Not with tears. Not with nostalgia. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is who you are. She froze, hands trembling. Why didn't you say something? She whispered. I laughed once. No humor. Because you don't warn a parasite you're about to cut it out. You don't negotiate with rot. You remove it. Quietly. Permanently. I stepped back, letting her see the full outline of the man she no longer knew. This wasn't the nurse she seduced, the safe man, the quiet one. This was the reckoning. Check your inbox, I said. Licensing board. Compliance audits. Flag contracts. Credit report hits. They'll be crawling through your past for weeks. Every signature you forged. Every date that doesn't line up. I didn't destroy you, Shayna. I just let the truth breathe for the first time. She collapsed into the chair, breath shallow, tears spilling now. I didn't mean to. You did, I said, interrupting without raising my voice. You meant all of it. And now you'll live with it. Alone. I turned then, walking away, slow and final, because there was nothing left to say. She broke something in me, but I turned the shards into blades, and now she was bleeding from wounds she never even saw coming. She's gone now. Not dead, just irrelevant. A name that rings hollow, like a fire alarm in an abandoned building. She moved out 3 weeks after the confrontation, tried to leave with grace, boxes neatly stacked, eyes down, lips trembling like maybe I'd offer her some last shred of compassion to carry with her. I didn't. I held the door and said nothing. She took her hoodie, left the fake succulents. I found a lipstick in the bathroom cabinet weeks later, rolled it open, and threw it in the trash without a second thought. The licensing board suspended her pending further investigation. Her next contract evaporated before it began. Dario? Gone. Disappeared the second the audits started sniffing around his name. He ghosted her like she was an unpaid invoice. I watched her LinkedIn go dark. One day she was healthcare consultant/travel nurse extraordinaire. The next she was just a grayed-out silhouette. No job, no location, just silence. And that's how she'll stay. A blank profile. A ghost with Wi-Fi. People ask if I miss her. I don't. I miss the man I was before her. Sometimes. The man who believed loyalty earned loyalty, who thought being good to someone made you safe in their hands. But that man's gone. And I'm not mourning him. I buried him with precision. I don't feel regret. I feel clarity. You want to know what real closure looks like? It's not peace. It's power. It's waking up every day knowing you dismantled the weapon pointed at your chest before it could fire. It's remembering every soft lie whispered into your ear and finally understanding it was the sound of someone picking your pocket in the dark. I'm not broken. I'm refined, sharper, calmer. A man with edges where softness used to be. And if you're watching this, if you've been where I was, don't wait for the confession. Don't waste breath on apologies that were never meant to be real. Just gather your facts, sharpen your silence, and when the time comes, cut clean. Let them bleed in the absence of your forgiveness. Because mercy is for the honest. And she was never that.